Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that is gonna connect to this first session of the Toolbox that is about sustainability and climate change for entrepreneurs. So I'm Domenico Vito. I'm a member of the Rotary Pastor Club of Social Entrepreneurs. And in this lesson, we are going to face four main topics that are awareness of impact on climate change, business ideas for circular economy, and understanding of sustainable value chains, and the ability to define the level and scope of sustainability. So let's run on the first part of our speech. First of all, a brief introduction about myself. I'm Dr. Domenico Vito. I'm a PhD bioengineer, and I work generally in a European project related to environment, but also I'm acting in several other initiatives and networks that are dealing with the climate activism and climate change. I'm basically like data guide, but as I said before, I deal with climate. So here in the Rotary Passport Club, I'm also the climate guy, we can say, and we will know about climate properly in these slides. So let's start. Awareness of impact on climate change. What is climate change? So surely you have been heard about climate change so far. A lot of rumor, a lot of public awareness has been raised into the previous years. Also with the social movement, we saw that with Greta, with other youths, climate change is a hot topic. But which is the definition, the official definition of climate change? I take here two official definitions that are coming from by two main bodies of the UN that are dealing with climate change. The first of all is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a pool of scientists that is deputed to study the state of the climate. So both of these two definitions have something in common. I will not read fully, I will let you read by yourself. But what is very, very interesting is that both of them are referred to human activities as a cause and to consistent and constant variability that is not predicted by natural phenomena of the climate phenomena. So the two elements that are defining the climate change after a normal change of weather or normal change of climate is that the variability, so the continuous change of the condition is out of the normal variability, and that this variability can be a result of human activities. In fact, why there is climate change? On this slide, you can see the basic physics of the effect of the greenhouse gas effect. So the greenhouse gas effect is a physical phenomena that is happening in atmosphere that is done by the presence of the so-called greenhouse gases that actually are properly making the atmosphere as a greenhouse. The sunlight are entering into the atmosphere with a certain power, with a certain wavelength. Then they are reflected by the surface. But once they are reflected, normally, without greenhouse gases, they will go outside in the space. And so they will not be trapped into atmosphere. But with the greenhouse gases, with the presence of such pollutant into the atmosphere, they are stacking into atmosphere, transferring their energy into heat. And this heat is actually changing all the condition and thermodynamical condition of the atmosphere. Imagine you have a pot and you are putting in a pot the water and you put the pot on the fire. So if you are continuously heating this pot, you will see that the the movement of the mass of water inside the pot are changing, as well as we are entering more heat into that. And so this is basically the effect of climate change. The more heat is trapped into the atmosphere, more like movement and chaotic movement of mass of atmosphere are happening. And these are causing all the effects that are related to climate change and greenhouse gas. First of all is the global warming, of course, we explained before. So which are these greenhouse gases? These four are the most like common and the most studied. The carbon dioxide, the CO2, that is the main one that is coming from burning of fossil fuels and so on. Methane, that is coming from agriculture, from also their fossil fuels and other activities. Nitrogenous oxide, that is coming, for example, on the burning of transportation. For example, in all cities, the levels of nitrogen dioxide is very high. Fluorinated gases, these are less common now, but in the past they've been like a very burden for like the pollution of atmosphere. And all of that are contributing to the so-called greenhouse gas, trapping the heat coming from the sun and reflected by the earth into the atmosphere, and then changing the thermodynamic conditions that led to like unpredictable phenomenon and extreme weather phenomena. So, as I said before, who is the cause of this greenhouse gas presence into atmosphere? We are. We are. The human activities are. As you can see from these slides, there are different counting of the contribution of each sector to the emission of greenhouse gases in atmosphere. First of all, energy sector, because it's coming from burning fossil fuels. As we are using fossil fuel for heating, for like making and producing energy, more we are polluting, more we are putting into atmosphere, especially CO2, but not only, we see also other type of pollutant that are not just have an effect on climate change, but also they have a bad effect on air quality. Transportation, we saw before, NOx or like nitrogenous gases are very produced by transportation. Agriculture is contributing to like methane emission a lot, at least intensive agriculture, of course, because there are also ways of performing agriculture that are more sustainable and need to be fostered properly in order to let become the agriculture sector less impactful on climate. So why we're studying climate change? I like said before, I will start among these graphs from the last one that you can see on the left corner. This graph is the temperature rise since 1850. When I was saying that climate change is something that goes beyond the normal variability, this graph is explaining at all this assertion. In fact, we can see that when the industrial revolution started, and basically when humankind has started to burn fossil fuels in order to product, in order to like make industrial revolution, the temperature on the planet have constantly risen because we are continuously putting these greenhouse gases, and as more we are putting these greenhouse gases, as more heat we are trapping into our atmosphere, and is like a non-linear phenomenon. Once it's like triggered, it goes continuously. Also because as more heat we are trapping, as more the sun is sending us the sunlight, the more heat is remaining in our atmosphere. So it's a serious problem if we are not changing our behaviors and our way to product and to perform the activities that we are doing. And in fact, the IPCC, the body that is made by scientists all over the world that are properly studying this phenomenon, has constantly warned the decision maker by their report. One of the famous one was the global warming of 1.5 degrees. Just remember this number because 1.5 is actually the threshold that by science we set up in order to do not fall in a catastrophe. Actually, the provisions say that if you are not staying inside 1.5 degrees of global warming by 2100, there will be like an unpredicted variability into the weather condition, into the extreme events, and so on. And if we are not managing to stay into this threshold, changing our behavior into this time span, then the nether science at the actual state can control and can respond also to the effect of climate change. And this story is very, very long. In the image on the center, you see a cover of a famous book that is called The Limits of Development, The Limits of Growth. This has been done, we will see, in 1975, in 1970s. And still there were a warning by the expert, by the researcher, that a grow in without limits was not possible into a finite Earth and infinite planet as we are. And of course, in the last image that I show here, you will see some of the side effects of climate change. Of course, in the city, we will have an extreme heat, the decline of biodiversity, the species loss, because we are threatening by climate change the main equilibria that is standing the nature itself. If we are changing the thermodynamic of atmosphere, all the life chains, all the events that are correlated, for example, to seasonal growth or seasonal development of biosphere and so on, are entangled. And so it's a very serious problem. It's not just a problem of heating or having more hot suns or summers, or having less rain and so on and so forth. It's properly an alteration of equilibria into the main and deep network of nature. That's why we have to take seriously this problem in our parts of our life. So let's go into a bit of history also to understand how this problem is faced by humanity, we can say, and by, of course, our societies. I tell that the problem of growth, the problem of unsustainable growth was known since so far. The first attempt to understand if in a world that is finite, like Earth, was possible to indefinitely grow, indefinitely consume resources, indefinitely bring society into production, was properly this study that was committed by the Club of Rome, that it's called The Limits of Growth. Limits of Growth is a study that has been performed by the scientists of MIT that wanted to understand the prediction, the scenario of an unlimited growth based on 6 variables that are industrialization, food production, consumption of resources, into like a mathematical model. And actually, this study has led to like a very, very important, but even tragic result. Since we can say 1970s was clear that in a Earth that is finite, um, an indefinite growth, an unsustainable growth, will lead to a scenario that will be like a collapse of the global system. And to avoid all of this was important to understand and implement a drastic measure to protect the environment. That's why even the UN in 1972 were starting to interrogate all the states about what to do for protecting the environment and to like prevent the harmfulness of an unsustainable growth. And the first one and the most important was 1972, where like the UNEP, the UN Environment Protection Agency, was born, and that were an important milestone that led finally also to understand climate change as a problem. We will see in the next slide. The output of this conference has been very, very important. As I said, the one of them is the declaration of UN Conference of Human Environment that finally led to the creation of the UNEP, but also an action plan for human environment and several other measures that started at the international level the discourse of environmental protection. Actually, even though we are not still into like the right path, all that we achieved has started from here. So this conference was very important. And actually, this year, the 2002, has represented the 50th anniversary of this conference. And in Stockholm, a great celebration has been done, and great also like reminding of the initial mission of Stockholm was performed properly this year. So as I said, continuing a little bit our path in history, after the Stockholm conference, the so-called IPCC was born. The IPCC was the panel, the intergovernmental panel that was made by scientists all over the world in order to study this particular phenomenon that was recognized as climate change. So the changing climate condition. And the main goal of this body that was done in collaboration between UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization was properly to achieve or understand if the human activities has an impact on these physical phenomena. So the IPCC is a complex body. They have different working groups and so on. I don't want to go in deep on that and just show this slide to understand that the study of climate change have also different areas of action. Of course, we have to understand the physical basis, but we also have to understand solution, for example, adaptation, how to adapt to climate change, and how to mitigate, so how to stop the continuous emission that we are putting into atmosphere and eventually reverse the presence of greenhouse gases into atmosphere. And as well also to count the type of greenhouse gases that we are putting into emission. All these are the function of this very important body that actually represents the best available knowledge on climate change on our like society. Continuing our path in history that finally will lead to the current state that I want to stress a bit in order to give a framework also for the following part of my presentation. We have in 1978 a very important milestone on understanding a way to change we can say the direction of an sustainable growth. That actually is the declaration of our common future. into this Our Common Future that was done by the Brundtland Commission in 1987, there has been the first definition of sustainable development as the sustainable development that satisfied the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future to satisfy their. So this definition of sustainable development was reprised also in 1992 into the so-called Earth Summit. Earth Summit was the first assembly at the global level that started the path towards a global response to climate change. It comes out with several declarations, like the Rio Declaration on Environment, Agenda 21, that is like a framework for local bodies in order to respond to environment and so on, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Forest Principle, and also, very important, as I said before, the Climate Change Convention. Climate Change Convention is the actual framework that at the global level represents like a global response for the phenomenon of climate change. The acronym is UNFCCC. Here we are. UNFCCC is UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's a framework because everything refers to there. It's a convention because it's an agreement between states on climate change. So the topic of this convention is address climate change globally. It defines a series of non-binding targets to preventing dangerous anthropogenic interferences with the climate system and terrestrial system. Actually, is the effort of nations to respond to the anthropogenics, so made by humans, effects and interference into climate. So actually the UNFCCC collects all the representative of states, the so-called parties, in order to have decision at the global level that take in account the best available science on climate change. So the reports of IPCC. In the meanwhile, the IPCC, the body that we see before, was studying the phenomena, and finally in 1990, between 1990 and 1993, it finally assessed that the climate change that we are facing now has an anthropogenic origin. So we have seen by the curve that show the rising temperature along the years, we have seen that the main, we can say the main common line that stands into this great increasing is properly the emission of greenhouse gases that is done by human activities. So finally, the achievement that scientifically has been achieved by the IPCC was properly that the origin of climate change has been anthropogenic. So I don't want to go too much in technical details, but I want to just give you a glance of how the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is done. Actually, it is based on basic principles that are like the setup, the collaboration among nations regarding the response to climate change. One of them, of course, is the equity between generation, equity between vulnerable communities and other stakeholders. The consideration of the particular needs of vulnerable states. For example, if we have a global response, of course, we have to consider that there are particular vulnerability around the world. The promotion of international economic system and the sustainable development, And two very important principles that are listed here. One is the so-called common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacities. And the other one is the lack of scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponed action. Why I cite these two? Because they are like the backbones of the global action towards climate change. The first one assesses that even though there are like a common responsibility on responding to climate change, the capabilities are different, and every state needs to respond in order to the financial, societal, and the political capabilities. Okay, we cannot push a state to respond to climate change over their capacities. And also it's important to consider that some states have developed, have industrialized before in history rather than others. And so this one have been achieved a more richness, of course, in the global scenario. And so they have to contribute more for responding to climate change. This is a form of equal response, equal and just response. The second one is double face, we can say. On a way, it's said that if we don't know what is like the effect, what are the effects of a certain action, certain innovation, certain technological solution, operation policies, and so on the environment, we do not have to perform it. This is like the principle of do not harm. We have not to do something that we are not completely owners of. So if there is a scientific knowledge, if there is something that we think that can be an improvement, can be something that can be like better for the society, better for whatever, but we don't know the effects on the environment, actually this principle that is inserted into this convention say that the application of such innovation is not like suggestible. And this is properly the principle of prevention. So prevent for potential harm that we cannot control. This is a like principle that is set up into this global environment, but we can say that can be applied to everything, also to our innovation as entrepreneurs. The second phase of this principle say that the lack of science cannot prevent us to act in favor of the environment. So if we know that, for example, something is quite certainly positive for environment, this not means that we have not to do that. Okay. So the lack of sciences need to not be an excuse for not acting in favor of the protection of the environment. Okay. If I know, for example, that planting a tree will help to capture CO2 or to like mitigate climate change, but I don't know quite well why, does not mean that I do not have to plant the tree, because this is certainly something that will help the environment. And in a way, I don't have the excuse of the lack of the scientific knowledge to act. Is a way to do not stop action. So here you see like a brief structure of the UNFCCC. I don't want to go in deep, just a glance, as I said, just to say that the UNFCCC is a global body that wants to be very participative. There are state actors, but also non-state actors, like youths, like entrepreneurs, like research organization, and so on and so forth. And as it represents like the global effort of the humanity in order to respond to climate change, it needs to involve all the stakeholders that are part of a society. So we have state stakeholders or party stakeholders that are the representative governors, But there are also non-party stakeholders that are basically representative of civil society, farmers, trade unions, women, whatever we have seen before. So here, still like the principle of UNFCCC, as I said, just a little dive in deep into the common differentiated responsibility. We have to consider that every one of us have joint responsibility. Everyone, we are part of the earth. We have to contribute to its protection, but we have to also consider the different circumstances in which we are, and do not push, for example, someone that cannot to respond to like the common threat. The party, okay, is dividing the world into two main areas. Properly standing the principle of common and differentiating responsibilities, we have countries that can be more responsible or more like effective in the financial response, and other countries that are maybe like more flexible in their response, can be more flexible, or properly because their condition as at economical and political level. So the 1992 has represented like the first of the meetings of this global response towards climate change, the first of the meeting of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Just to like give a glance also of the current situation of the present. From there, we have a lot of these meetings that basically are called COP, Conference of Parties. And in each one of that, we achieve a step towards the current framework of the response to climate change. One of that, surely you will know, is the Kyoto Protocol. That was like the first attempt to have a global agreement for emission reduction. You want to achieve like the gas emission reduction of 5.2 by 2012, but finally it was not going so well, and standing the goal of reduction of 5%, it achieves the increase of 50%. So it was like a first attempt, but not so successful, we can say. And gradually, of course, the IPCC will always like warning about the state of the environment, and especially in the fourth assessment, in the fourth report that this body has been done on studying climate change, it was settling properly the threshold that I was mentioning before, the 1.5 degrees. Also providing scenarios for like helping the state to understand if they are not acting properly, the possibility to have an increase over control of the temperature of atmosphere was very present. The graph that you can see on the right side is showing basically the scenarios of increasing temperatures by 2100 in three different, we can say, conditions. If you are following the current pledge, if you are following like new policies for responding on climate change, and actually if you are not doing anything. If you're not doing anything, we are going to reach like an increase that is very far away from the threshold of 1.5 degrees. So it's important for states and for all society to act and to respond to the climate change. But how we can respond, and how now we achieved a global agreement that can be better in a way of the Kyoto Protocol in order to set up also the businesses into the response to climate action. The current, we can say, framework and agreement that has been done by states to respond globally to climate change is the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was set into the 21st of the meeting that I was mentioning before, the COP21, in 2015. And actually, it established a global framework for avoiding dangerous climate change interference by humankind, of course, and wanting to achieve the limit of 1.5 degrees by 2100. Actually, the Paris Agreement has introspected the science, so has introspected the message of the scientists that is saying to us that we have to achieve this threshold. And all the consequential action and consequential policies that are following the Paris Agreement have this as a main objective. Is a universal and legally binding agreement on climate change, as I said before. So how it is structured and how it, like, in a way, organize globally the response to the climate change. Into, we can say, these 4 areas of action. Mitigation, that is actually the reduction of emission that are greenhouse gases, but basically. Adaptation, so global response on like how to adapt and how to perform all that action that in a way responds to extreme events, for example, that can perform early warning system. All the things that in a way are used by our society to adapt to the changes that are already happening and we can avoid because they are just there. Imagine about hurricanes, floods, and so on. These are effects of climate change that are present, are not like prevision, are current phenomena. We have to learn to respond to them. And adaptation is probably part of the strategies to respond to climate change. Loss and damage is a sort of insurance for the ones that have been already hit by the effects of climate change. And the Paris Agreement is providing properly these measures in order to financially respond to the damages and losses. So something that is just like a reality. Imagine of the small state island and so on. Transparency. It's important, also standing the bad experience of Kyoto Protocol, to like have a transparent counting of emission globally in order to have a real physical falling down of all the action that we are doing for prevent climate change. So just to understand in a glance what is Paris Agreement and why it's important, actually Paris Agreement is pushing the states and also business and every part of society to contribute to the so-called national determined contributions, or like strategies that are asked to states, to the nations, to in a way respond to the commitments of Paris Agreement, as we see before, in terms of mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and so on. In something like, you can see this small like comic that show that is like when a doctor say to you, like the scientists say to you, if you want to achieve a goal, if you want to like achieve that objective, you have to agree with your companions in order to achieve together. For example, the scientists are saying that for let fly the balloon, you have to reach 45 kilos, no matter who is more weight or less weighted and so on. But together you have to reach that goal. And this achievement is basically the goal of the Paris Agreement, okay? Everyone need to like agree among the other parties, other states of the nation in order to set that goal. You understand basically that the Paris Agreement is a multilateral agreement. So it pushes towards collaboration. among states. Alone, we have problems. Only together we can find solutions. So, just a few reminds about these NDCs because they can affect also business. Business, in a way, can contribute to these NDCs by their action in reduction their emission and so on. And actually, NDCs are revised every 5 years by the Commission of the UNFCCC, so the main framework on climate change, in order to update and to also adapt to the changing condition of international and environmental scenarios. So, why Paris Agreement is also important for business? Is important for business because it set up a market of emission trading. Emission trading can be a global market that can contribute also to enrich new economies and to open and unleash areas of action also for the private sector in terms of projects, in terms of financial investment, in terms properly on emission exchange. For example, as a private entity, of course, in collaboration with states, you can also apply for projects on the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund that are like two funds that have been constituted under the Paris Agreement in order to respond to mitigation action, the Green Climate Fund, and adaptation action, Adaptation Fund. So it's very important to know this framework also, because for like a social entrepreneur, for social business, can be something to like better understand in order to like set up also businesses that can contribute positively to environment and to climate change response. As I said before, for example, this is the case of Green Climate Fund. You can apply with projects that, of course, are evaluated by expert boards and by like officials in order to, for example, mitigate. For example, if I want to plant a tree into like a developing country, this can be a project that, in a way, can be presented into the board of the Green Climate Fund, and you can receive also some kind of funding if the project is well written. Just to going into conclusion, COP are not just big meetings where head of states are joining and so on, but they can be also laboratory for new technique, for negotiation, and for also problem solving. I said here these very important stepstone, in my opinion, onto the negotiation on climate change, that is Talanoa dialogue. Talanoa basically is a word that means we are on the same boat into the Fiji dialect. And actually, this Fiji dialect and this word was defining like technique that has been used into the villages of the Pacific Oceans in order to solve common problem into the village. This has been turned into a negotiation technique that basically wants to organize the dialogue, the discussion on the problem solving into three main questions that are where we are, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. It's a nice also problem solving technique, in my opinion, because it allows to put all the stakeholders into a peer circle, we can say, and to let them discuss openly, also sharing experiences, sharing knowledge, and so on, based on a structured way. The structured way is to respond into these three questions: the where we are, assessing the state of art, where do we want to go, and that actually is like the definition of objective and goals, and how do we get there. So the strategy and the way, the methodology that we want to perceive to achieve our goals. So just to conclude, climate change is not just science, policies, and so on, but also social movements. It represents a fragile equilibrium, we can say, between communities and nature. We all know about the phenomena of Greta Thunberg that has moved the youth all over the world to deal with the environment. And I can say that even though the best strategies, the best action, also from businesses and so on, if there is not there is no participation and engagement of civil society, every action is actually unuseful. And so it's very important also the action that Greta has done in general, not only in terms of awareness, but also in terms of engagement of the civil society, because without the contribution of all of us, of all individuals, and of all the communities, we cannot achieve a real change into our model of development and our model of consumption. And so the last slide is this one. We are facing now a period of multiple crises. We now face, I explained a little bit the climate change, but we are now in different multiple crises. And this image I very like because it has like a double interpretation, we can say. We can say that the most recent, more near, and also recent crisis that we are all aware of has been COVID. Then there is the economical crisis, and there is like the overarching climate change that is also more long-term, more like we can say stay on the big scenario that is always there and so on. And of course, it seems that if we are facing one, and then there is another, then there is another one, and so on. But there is also another interpretation, we can say, that is, if we are learning to surf the first wave, that is climate change, then sometime we can also able to learn the other change. That means that all these crises are very, very intertwined. And maybe they can be the same crisis. COVID, for example, is a clear example on how this health crisis has been caused by a mismanagement of biodiversity in an ecosystem that led finally to the spillover of this virus that was not in humans before, was in another piece, but our mismatchment and our like mismanagement of of the ecosystem and also of the resource that we have from nature has finally led to like a biological crisis. Okay, the I don't want to mention the Wuhan markets cases and so on, but this means also that all these signals of crisis wants us to learn that we have to change something in our system. We have to change something in our, we can say, models. And this is a crisis, of course. And as it is, it has dangers because a lot of danger are on and threats are on our path. But there are also opportunities to change. For example, business opportunities, new business opportunities, for example, on responding to climate change or responding to health and economical crisis. And if we can learn to surf the first wave, we can then learn to surf the other waves. If we can learn to surf the crisis, then we can learn to surf the other crisis, even they seem bigger or smaller or whatever. So I very like this image because it represents our actual times, unfortunately, but we can learn to read this allegoric in order to like understand and act better. And with that, I will close the first part, running into the second part, business ideas for circular economy.